Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Asghari. I'm going to momentarily adjust my camera. We have with us my good friend, Mr. Matthew Pauly. How's it going, Matthew?
Oh, very good, Payman. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you very much for agreeing to jump on. Our original guest, I guess, had a conflict in schedule, so he didn't come on.
Well, that's great, actually. Very convenient for me, so I appreciate that.
Well, you're my savior. We almost had to scrap the episode. I mean, I get paid hundreds of $1,000s per episode.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, for the second Maserati. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the hard knock life.
Yeah.
Let's see, Matthew. So we got a couple of things we agreed to talk about today. The first one's going to be the operation, I'm calling it Enduring Ostrich. They're trying to cull the ostriches, and also Trump. So fill us in with what's going on with the ostriches.
Sure. I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle. I haven't been the primary researcher on this, but on the Stop C293 committee, we have a couple of just outstanding researchers, and they've been diving deep on this. And it turns out that there's not very many people are looking into, well, why is this Canadian Food Inspection Agency so concerned about culling these ostriches, which aren't food? They have never been raised for food. They've never been sold for food. What is their jurisdiction on this? Why are they in there in the first place, right? Well, it turns out that this might have been mentioned, but by some people, but I don't think it's been brought to the attention that this is a business wire, a Berkshire Hathaway company, and they put out this article back in March 31 of 2020. Ostrich Pharma USA produces antibodies to block the virus that causes COVID-19. Okay, so let me put this up and over. There it is. Okay, so this is stunning. It turns out that what they do is they inject the ostrich with a certain genome of a virus or something like that. Now, then the ostrich produces antibodies automatically, and then it passes it along to their eggs. Now, these things lay giant eggs. I mean, they're like little basketballs or something, or a football. I mean, they're just huge. And it turns out that in their lifetime, they produced 22 kilograms of these antibodies in their eggs, 22 kilograms per bird over their lifetimes. And it turns out, and they've actually done studies. Let's see the here. Okay. 10 ostriches have been vaccinated, and the antibodies from their eggs have already been used in masks, nasal drops, and candies in Japan. Masks with antibody-impregnated liners have been proven to block 99.9% of influenza viruses. That's quite a number, considering normally masks are useless for blocking viruses. So these antibodies that when they lace them into the mask are extremely effective. More than 70 medical institutions in Japan have purchased large numbers of ostrich antibodies masks to prevent infections among healthcare workers, and the order rate is increasing. The Repo Medical Clinic, a cancer hospital in Osaka, Japan, has been in a clinical trial on the use of ostrich antibody nasal drops to prevent hospital-acquired coronavirus infection. If a patient is infected with SARS-CoV-2, a doctor will spray the antibody solution into the nasal cavity of hospitalized patients, close contacts, and healthcare professionals. According to Dr. Takahiro Ishikawa, president of the Repo Medical Clinic, in the absence of vaccines and therapeutics, proving that the ostrich antibody nasal drops have a preventative effect could be a real breakthrough. Dr. Tsukamoto's research also encompasses the study of the ostrich antibodies as a therapeutic. He and his research team have published results showing that 100% efficacy of H5N1 avian influenza antibodies injected into chickens infected with the avian influenza virus. That's amazing, considering we're in the middle of an H5N1 pandemic. This is just remarkable. This is actually, again, from 2020. No wonder that they want to kill these birds.
Can I jump in? Let me dumb it down for us normal people. Basically, this is ivermectin again?
Well, no, not exactly. I mean, in the sense ivermectin is a repurposed, antiparasitic. But in the sense that this is from 2020, they discovered that they could make these antibodies in these ostriches, and their eggs would have them. And it's way better than using chickens. And all they have to do is take these antibodies, harvest them out of the eggs, put them into a nasal spray. You just spray this up your nose, and it works. You don't get the illness. So, and they're saying like 100% efficacy in some of these tests. And they've got one for H5N1. To reduce potential rejection after inoculation in humans, Dr. Tosakomoto is developing an antibody drug that uses various enzymes to cut ostrich antibody molecules into smaller molecules containing antigen-binding regions. Wow. This is incredible. And it says, the last paragraph, according to Ostrich Pharma USA co-CEO Stuart Greenberg, we recognize the enormous need for multiple approaches to the COVID-19 pandemic in the US. In order to be a participant in this war, we will need to immunize large numbers of ostriches, purify large amounts of the antibodies from the ostrich eggs, and get manufacturing capacity to make products like masks and nasal drops. We will need to develop an approach to marketing, including defining the regulatory path when appropriate. We expect a team with some key partners to accomplish this. Now, this is remarkable. So this is like huge information that this was available in 2020 before the vaccines came out. Now, notice that we didn't, the USA didn't research this and publish this, because to get the emergency use authorization of that COVID-19 mRNA jab, which it's a gene therapy that they're marketing as a vaccine, which is ironic because they tried to change the definition of a vaccine, of course, because these things don't confer any resistance to getting the infection, nor do they stop transmission. But so what they've done here is got an actual way that you can, basically treat people so they're not going to get a pandemic that's been, leaked from a biolab, as our two, big pandemics in Canada have been from. They've not been from the zoonotic illness coming from animals. They've been coming from leaked biolab. SARS-CoV-1 in 2003 was from a biolab. It's an engineered one. And same thing with SARS-CoV-2. We know that. That was actually, by the way, new fact on this. People are focusing on the Wuhan lab getting this funding from EcoHealth Alliance, which was NIAID, Anthony Fauci was sending money through them. But now we found USAID just in the last 2 days. USAID was also funding that lab. But the amount of money that lab got for developing, that's finding final touches on the coronavirus bioweapon, actually, that's only 10%. The other 90% was funding directly from NIAID for a whole 10 years prior. Dr. Ralph Barrick, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, had been funded to weaponize this virus, like the spike protein. And he's a veterinarian with a specialty in conferring infertility on wild animals using self-spreading vaccines. Interesting, because we know these vaccines shed.
Matthew?
Yeah.
Let's since we're going back, let's talk about COVID before coming back to the ostriches.
Sure.
What was COVID to you? Like, to me, I've been thinking about this. It was just a theft. They used the force of government to force us to buy these vaccines without the profits ever coming back to us.
Well, there's that. There's many angles on this. The angle that I for me is most powerful, and perhaps that I mean, not most powerful, but I can confer some expertise on this. This was one of the first examples we've seen. Well, it really is the first giant example of them using the authorities using mind control on the masses, using mass trauma-based fear mind control. What they did, right, when they had Professor Ian Ferguson, University College of London, who came out with his computer modeling studies of transmission and lethality, which, by the way, he's the go-to guy for the WHO and has always been doing this for them. And each time he does these models for a pandemic like the swine flu one, it's like many orders of magnitude higher than actual. Okay, so he's basically corrupt, and he won't share his source code. He won't share his data. So he said it was 3.4% mortality. So they broadcast to all Canadians and Americans and around the world, if you go outside, if you don't respect this lockdown and you go outside and you get this vaccine, or sorry, this virus, you're going to get 3.4% chance of dying. So this was like an existential threat. And then they played that death counter on the CNN corner of their screen for like months. And of course, the numbers that were going up weren't really from COVID-19. It was people in motorcycle accidents and stuff that got PCR tested. Oh, we found it, because anything over 24 cycle thresholds is kind of getting into the territory where it's not really accurate. And then at 36, even Dr. Fauci admitted that all you're detecting is dead little particles of nucleotides from some virus that you had a while ago, or like months ago, or a month or two ago. So we know at the 40 cycle threshold standard, this has been confirmed that the WHO prescribed, these things are 97% false positive in the absence of symptoms of that illness. And of course, we also know that the creator, Dr. Kerry Mullis, who came up with PCR, said it should never be used and cannot be used to diagnose an infection. So this was a fear-based mind control because they told people to socially isolate from their own families and friends. Now, what happens with human beings, as I mentioned in previous engagements with you, is that if this was found out in the 60s by the KGB and the CIA, that if you socially isolate people and you play them nonstop fear-based messaging every day, really like existential fear, you're going to die, people will eventually succumb, and they will now become believing what you tell them. And especially when that, voice comes out and tells them it's all going to be okay. You just have to do what we say. You just don't go outside, don't associate with anybody. And, for God's sakes, wash your hands 5 times a day. And, wear masks constantly, all the time. And so they brainwashed people. And then people became sympathetic with their captors, as is done in these sorts of, when people are in that state. And that's why, Premier Ford and the premiers across Canada would come out at 10:30 or 10 in the morning and every day during the beginning of those lockdowns. And they tell people, oh, it's very scary what's going on with COVID. But if you just do what we say, wear these 2 masks and, and don't go, visit with your friends. And the vaccine is going to come. It's going to come and it's going to save us all. And they brainwash people. And their actual public approval went up because of this mechanism, this vulnerability that we have. So this, to me, the COVID-19 was an example of using fear-based, trauma-based mind control. It's trauma because when you put an existential threat that you're going to die, just like they did for the global warming thing for the last 25 years, they've been telling people that the ice poles are going to melt in 10 years. The water is going to come up on the eastern seaboard and western seaboard, and it's going to drown all the people in the cities, and then we won't be able to grow food in the west because there'll be desertification of the land. And they were convincing people that we're going to die from man-made CO2 because it causes climate change. This whole thing, of course, was a complete psyop.
To be fair, climate change, it could have been a serious issue, but thankfully Justin Trudeau introduced the carbon tax, and we've solved that problem.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, no, with the virus, it sees the dollar bills in the air, and it goes, no, die.
Those photons, they get reflected off the dollar bills back into space.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, actually, the other thing. I mean, I have a tendency to get on tangents, but I just got to mention that the amount of aerial spraying that's been going on in the last 10 years in North America and in Europe as well, and in Australia, New Zealand, is just atrocious. And they're dumping, aluminum oxide, barium oxide, and strontium 90. By the way, barium oxide.
Hold on to that thought before we go to
okay, I won't go into that.
We can. I just Patrick H is asking, what should happen next? What is the best way to make sure this doesn't happen again?
We need to get people woken up. The problem is we need more shows like this to reach more people, to wake them up to what's going on, because our biggest enemy right now is that mainstream media is $500 million has gone from the Trudeau government to the mainstream media. And that's not counting the 1.2 billion or whatever they're funding for the CBC, which is, I mean, as Rocco Galati said in October of 2020, the constitutional lawyer, the CBC is like the Pravda in the Soviet Union. They are just constantly putting up propaganda to support the mainstream narrative of the government. That's it. So the media is keeping people in this isolated place where if you even question the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine, you're an anti-vaxxer. You're a conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, of course, we should have a betting pool on these things because we'd all be wealthy by now, because so many of these things that they call were conspiracy theories, like that there was no successful therapeutics. And if you talk about ivermectin, you were just talking about horse paste and all this crap. That the vaccine was safe and effective, that it was 95% efficacy, which turned out to be actually a relative risk reduction number. The absolute risk reduction was sub 1%. So all these things they call conspiracy theories have come out to be true. So the mainstream media has been continuing to this day. Do you know in the vaccine schedule right now, they are giving 3 COVID-19 vaccines to babies in their first year of birth? It's just atrocious. We know that the immune system of a child can't even respond to vaccines at that age. And we know that children, actually their immune systems, in general, not necessarily at 1 year old, have superior ability to fight off infections. COVID-19 was basically the lethality we know now is essentially the same as a moderately bad flu year. So every 3 or 4 years, we have a moderately bad flu year. That's it. But they made it out to be something so lethal that there's no reason you would want to vaccinate children. There's no risk to them. The average person who died from COVID-19 was 82 years old or something with 3.3 or 3.5 comorbidities. So they're already got things that are killing them, and this kind of just nudged them a little bit over the edge. So anyway, it's appalling.
I can jump in as well. So
Yeah.
Patrick, my answer to your question is not going to be as sexy as Matthew's, but you need to go out there and start talking to people. I know it's hard when you're confronted with a liberal that believes everything the media says. But even just listening to them, at least understand where they're coming from so that you can, craft your arguments better. That's a starting point.
I'll say, as not the PPP candidate in this interview, that really the key here is that we need to elect people that will pull us out of these globalist institutions that were created by billionaires who are eugenists. These particular, like Rockefeller was a eugenicist. And he created the United Nations. It was actually called the League of Nations originally, and then it was attacked and then taken down, and then they created a new one called the United Nations. And the actual UN Agenda 2030 with its SDG, Strategic Sustainable Development Goals, SOGI, which is all the stuff about teaching transgenderism in schools and pushing that whole agenda. The idea of climate change is killing us, and it's from man-made CO2, which is bunk. It is bunk. And the reason is, that it exists, and they have these IPCC saying that they have these thousands of climate scientists. Well, actually, it's like that letter that supposedly all 17,000 doctors signed to say no to RFK Jr. being the Secretary of HHS, where anyone can go in and say, I'm Dr. Dracula, I'm an MD. And the same thing, it turns out.
Dr. Acula.
So, I mean, it's ridiculous. And also, we got to remember that the climate change industry, it's an industry now because governments are funding it. And so are the oil companies, because the oil companies are making more money on carbon sequestration than they're making on oil. I mean, it's huge. And the government's paying for it all. So this whole thing is corrupt as heck, and it's all coming from these globalist institutions. And only when we pull out of the WHO and the UN, and of course the World Economic Forum, I mean, my goodness, that will then free Canada up. We will not have pandemics being declared on us because it's just all messaging coming from Tedros. By the way, we know Tedros, of course, was a member of the executive of a terrorist organization in Ethiopia. Oh, and guess what? He covered up 3 cholera epidemics. Oh, who was doing cholera vaccine experimentation in Ethiopia at that time? Oh, the same person who strongly supported Tedros for being the head of the WHO. And I'm for sure a number of you have seen the picture of him in drag at a party, just like Klaus in drag on the beach. I mean, these people are twisted, they're compromised, they're blackmailed, and they're running, basically, they're just the evil front people for the people of the real power. Anyway, we cannot remain in the WHO and the UN. We were all programmed, as I was as a child. I was carrying my little UNICEF box, trick-or-treating, door to door, collecting money. And one year, my father changed his mind. I guess he finally found out some facts about what was going on with the UN and UNICEF. I mean, the UN is just absolutely, hell-bent on the biggest propaganda thing, this UN Agenda 2030, you've seen this big, huge circle and has all these wonderful boxes with nice little graphics and then little things about sustainability and caring for everybody. This is a perfect example of lying by saying the opposite thing, making it sound so beautiful and caring. We care so much about humanity. We care so much about your family. You must support this thing. We're going to save the earth. This is just horrific conning the people. And unfortunately, because most of us, humanity, we have a built-in concern for one another. We have humanity. That's the definition of us. We have a concern for the earth and the animals and the plants. And that's why we all have pets, we're lots of pets because we love animals. We care about the earth. And what they did is they weaponized that care. They weaponized that. So, you want to care about the earth. And now how did that come? So we know Mark Carney is a member of the Club of Rome, right? The Club of Rome in the 1960s was approached by the international banking cartel and said, we need a way of getting control of the world's population. And particularly, we want to actually control them, particularly get rid of the middle class. You see, we need some crisis managed, something to, and they came up with, the Club of Rome was commissioned to do this. They came up with this whole report of how they were going to, what they had to do was create a crisis that the earth was going to die because of man-made pollution. And it, of course, eventually, it got refined into, man-made CO2 causes climate change. When, getting back to what I was saying about the climate change bunk, so the industry of both academia is publish or perish. If you don't publish research, you are not going to get a tenure track position. And no one's going to listen to you as a tenure track professor if you don't continue doing research. They really take you seriously. Well, where do they get their research money from? Well, it's the government. And they also get it from big pharma. And they get it from oil companies. And as we know, big pharma is so huge now. They're the largest lobby in Washington. And if you put together the money that these companies have, they would be a top 15 Western country in terms of their GDP. Anyway, so what they did is they made it so that you publish or perish. And so all the climatologists have to support the mainstream UN and IPCC narrative that human change CO2 is causing climate catastrophe. And that's the only people that can get the funding to write the papers. If you actually are an independent geologist or climatologist, and not all of them, but I mean the independent people have come out and they've said, no, this is absolute bunk. If you go back and look at the ice cores and you look at the rock formations, we have evidence quite clearly that CO2 is an after effect of the sun cycles, because we have all these different sun cycles. Some cycles are 11 years, some are 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. And when these things happen to coincide at the same time, and you're in a high in all these cycles at once, what happens? You have rapid heating of the earth because you have all the solar radiation that's higher than normal. And what happens? You have a greening of the planet. Like we're actually experiencing a little bit of greening now in the last few years. And this is really good. It means we have more plants and we have more feed for the animals. And we see now water being available in places it wasn't before. We see, all sorts of positive developments because CO2 is not just a teeny fraction. And that helps as well. But the CO2, you see, doesn't come right away. What happens is, as the sun heats up and you have this global greening going on, eventually all that extra CO2 from the plants is going into the ocean, right? And the ocean is like a big carbon sink. And then over the next 400 to 800 years, it starts to get saturated with carbon, and then it releases it. And all of a sudden, you see CO2 levels rising. So the cause is the sun heating, more solar radiation creates more CO2, but it goes into the ocean, and then after 400 to 800 years, it comes out of the ocean, and we see CO2 levels go up. It's the opposite of what they're selling us. Just like they say they're out there care so much about us and our families and the earth, it's the opposite. They don't want us. We know this. We know these people. We've seen it. I mean, when a person stands on a stage and says, if we do a really good job with vaccines and healthcare, we can reduce the global population by 15%. That's, and then if you look at their history of who their father was, who was very instrumental in Planned Parenthood, and whose great-great-grandfather was allegedly Rockefeller's assistant, who recommended the injection of the horse gunk vaccine that was injected in 1917, 1918 into all the people that suddenly coincided with the Spanish flu. And they went into the trenches of World War I, and they had this bacteria shedding off them and made the other guys sick. And then they come back to America and the places, and they did this huge vaccine campaign again on the people. And we had the Spanish flu. Anyway, so I'm just putting my point here. These are eugenics people. This all goes back a few hundred years to
Matthew, we have Mr. Tom Luongo is here.
Oh,
do you want me to bring him up?
Sure, absolutely. We'll talk about the ostrich thing. Absolutely.
We kind of went on off down a tangent, but
it's all related.
Oh,
Mr.
I am
Luongo,
so
how's
sorry.
it going?
I am so sorry. I knew there was something on my schedule, and I kept looking around this morning, going, "Where is it in my inbox?" And then I could not figure it out.
Yeah.
So I'm very sorry I'm late. I hate to do that, but I'm here.
Lucky
That's
for
okay.
you.
I covered it for you.
For you, I'm a nobody, so nobody will hold it against you.
Hi, Tom.
Good morning, Arthur. How are you?
Good. So if you're going to smoke, I'm going to get my vaporizer. So we were just talking about the bigger picture, but we don't talk about the ostrich farm. So I'll hand it over to you. You want to comment on the ostrich farm?
I'm not sure what we're talking about. Actually, let's back this up a little bit.
Sorry, Payman. I'll let you take it. You talk.
Sure.
Yeah, there was. They're trying to cull 400 ostriches in Edgewood, British Columbia, and
Right.
I went there to support them. But it's a little bit strange. And Matthew is saying how this might be tied to Bill C-293. Government's trying to flex its muscles. Matthew went into more detail about how the ostriches could be used to produce antibodies. If you don't know anything about that, we could just go directly into Trump. No.
Yeah, that is not my area of expertise, guys. That's not what I do. So I have no idea.
Okay, tell you what, we can wrap this up and go into the Trump thing, but I just want to mention that this is a big deal because this has potential, according to a doctor that I've spoken to actually upturn the entire WHO and UN agenda of using RNA jabs to make us all safe. That's what they say, right? And because what's been discovered with these ostrich eggs is that the superiority of their antibodies is so powerful that they have the best immune system of any animal on the planet. And when you take these antibodies from their eggs and you put them in a nasal spray with humans, confers instant immunity to H5N1. That's why they want to kill off these birds, to destroy the evidence of these research birds, even though there's a corporation in Japan that's already got this stuff for sale. So I just want to say this is a huge deal, and I would just direct people to follow Stop C293 committee, because we're going to be having a space tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, the 5th of February, and that is at Stop C293 COM TTEE. And that's our handle on Twitter. And with that, I will hand it over to you.
All right. Well, we'll just do a panel. I'll be in the middle here. I'll referee, and let's go with Tom first.
Sure.
Patrick H. He asked, do you think Trump is taking the right steps? It's an open-ended question, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah. In the short answer, very much. I'll be honest with you. I never thought in a million years that I'd see a guy like Donald Trump come in and do what he's doing. I fully expected somebody like Ron Paul to come in and do this. So he's kind of acting like he's kind of sandbagged us, and all of a sudden, he's turned into the second coming of Ron Paul. This is if I had my wish list for 4 years of the Trump administration, I would have asked for half of what I've already gotten in the first 2 weeks. And I mean, defunding USAID, going after OSHA, going after the National Endowment for Democracy. That's next. The cabinet that he's put together, all of it. And I had an inkling of this because I have a friend and patron who's a member of who's not a member of, but close to the transition team. And they warned us about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, saying this was going to be the plan, that they were going to use audits and executive orders to stop all the wasteful spending, and then go in and ferret it all out, get the passwords, and then let everybody know what's going on. And at this point, this is like the Twitter files on steroids, right? And when the Twitter files came out a few years ago, we finally started to get an idea of how bad the government censorship was. And now we're at a point where we're finding out how bad the government waste is. And we always knew this. And so from the financial side of things, I've been arguing for 3 years now. I'm like, guys, tell me we can't cut spending. You're out of your minds. Like, how much of this is complete waste? How much of this is just people? Well, all these salaries we're spending money on, and then their pensions, and then their health care, and the Secret Service details, and the this and the that, and everything else. And I'm like, you don't actually understand how much money this is, because I just don't think anybody has any idea. And we're coming to find out that it's an unbelievable amount. So. I think it's funny, actually, that, I've actually heard out of Elon Musk yesterday, one of my talking points, which was, hey, why don't we just go back to the 2019 budget? Like, the Biden administration asked, balloon the budget by $1.7 trillion on nothing. Why don't we just cut that and go back to the 2019 budget? Now tell me we can't fix the balance sheet of the United States. And that's exactly what he said yesterday. I'm like, oh, okay. So I've long suspected they have people on the inside of they're either listening to me or whatever. But it's really kind of funny, I'm honestly, I'm just cribbing what Rand Paul said, 3 years ago. Why don't we just go back to the 2019 budget? Let's cut a penny from every department. If we got a penny from everything, 1%. What would that look like every year for 5 years? What would that look like? So, yeah, no, this is immense, because this is literally the root of everything wrong with the United States. Runs through things like all the NGOs, USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, all of this stuff. We come to find out that these people are using our tax money to fund operations against the United States citizens in every level, be it all of it. And it's disgusting. And how do you just not cheer all of this going on? Because this needs to be out there. Because once this really permeates the American consciousness, the Democrats will never win an election for the next 50 years. This will be the most durable political coup against against a particular type of governance since FDR, when he turned us all commie, for lack of a better term. So, yes, I think I'm really happy with what Trump is doing right now. He can continue to do this. I hate to get away from my phone for more than an hour, because he does something awesome about every hour.
I would just,
you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I generally concur that it's a humongous relief. I mean, we were very worried up here in Canada. Are you in Canada or the States?
I'm in Florida. I'm
okay.
I'm as not Canadian as Canadian can be, even though I do love the sport of hockey, and I'm a huge Rush fan. But and I have a lot of friends up in Canada. But we want to help liberate you all from the Trudeau.
Well, I was just going to say, we have a lot of Canadians coming your way, and they're already there. Viva Frey, I think, is down there. One of our quoted journalists.
So is Tracy Schuchart now as well, and a few others. Yes, absolutely.
I'm ecstatic with the things Trump has been doing. Really, I am, and I'm hoping that this will inspire Canadians to support a party that, like the People's Party of Canada, that is essentially endorsed the entire Trump agenda, and it has the same ideas. The biggest problem that's predating upon our countries is the globalist infiltration.
Of course.
I would like to, however, add that there is something that he's done which has caused great concern. And this is the Stargate thing. There are many people who are supporters of Trump, even up here in Canada. We were willing to write him a pass on this warp speed thing. He clearly had bad advisors, and he didn't quite understand that this was actually, not about making people healthy, and that the evidence is out there, that it doesn't stop transmission, it doesn't stop infection. And in fact, the shortening of your life and infertility is a pretty serious side effect.
Yes.
And turbo cancer, et cetera. So what's happened with the Stargate thing, there's two problems with it. One, it was disingenuous the way it was presented, because Larry Ellison of Oracle was standing there with Sam Altman, as if that was, I don't know if you listened to the way that Larry Ellison tried to explain it, but he clearly didn't really know much, and he was just going by a script. Well, it turns out that, somebody posted up on X, and I followed it up, that there's a project Stargate announced prior to July the 10th of 2024, and he's putting in like Microsoft is putting in 50 billion a year into expanding AI data centers, like large data centers, to add that to AI to their Azure platform, to supply Oracle and OpenAI with actual strategic platform for OpenAI. And Oracle was going to be one of the suppliers of extra computing capabilities to make this happen. So the idea that 3-hour dinner with Gates a few days before that announcement, and all of a sudden Larry Ellison is now in this news conference with Trump and Sam Altman, which, by the way, is quite a not good character, as Elon has pointed out, the stuff. And of course, there's been this unfortunate death of the big whistleblower in that company, the young guy from India who's been a fantastic AI researcher, who found out that their core business model was potentially, well, as the Ian Carroll show calls, it was probably highly illegal, because they were actually slurping up everything on the internet and doing books and then changing the wording and violating copyrights and putting it out. So the idea that these two guys, Sam Altman and Larry Ellison, are fronting, the Gates is in the background, and I don't understand how Trump could let that deception go on. And also, it's a doubling down of warp speed from the perspective of those people who support him, that are, listen, we're willing to give you a pass on warp speed, but you should really realize that this is a depopulation agenda. These cancer vaccines made by AI in 48 hours on an mRNA.
Let's let Tom respond.
Okay, I'm done. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, well, what I would say about that is, well, one, I think you kind of hit on the important point here that Larry Ellison may not even know what's going on. Ellison is one of the few guys in Silicon Valley I actually like, of old school guys that I really like. And the reason is because Larry Ellison's always said, look, the internet's not free. Like, he's always argued that someone has to pay the server bills. Someone has to pay for something. And, Ellison just went and bought Paramount, by the way. Like, that's a big deal. He's now in control of that aspect of. I'm going in a different direction with Larry Ellison. I'm going to give him a pass on this. Sam Altman, I don't trust as far as I can throw him, and I don't like him anywhere near the administration. I'm not a huge fan of Howard Lutnick either. Trump is not a white knight. I'm going to just make it abundantly clear. So I think it's very good that we continue to criticize, or at least open our eyes to, keep our eyes open for things that are snakes in the garden. Right? That's the important point here, because so much is being done so quickly, so fast, and Trump doesn't have. He's not a details guy. Okay, he never has been. Like, that's not his gig. His gig is he's the best salesman the world has ever seen.
And negotiate.
And he has a very, very specific agenda when it comes to money, finance, capital handling, how to deal with interest rates, how to deal with commodities. And that's his thing. And the other stuff, yeah, like this is an issue. And I think that, if, and I'll just put it this way. Let's see what happens with him and Gates. Okay. Because Trump is going to get an earful from a lot of different people. He's going to get an earful from Putin when they finally sit down to talk for real. Because Putin's got all the dirt on these people, without a doubt. There are aspects of AI as it helps us. It's going to help us in medicine, maybe not with our mRNA, certainly. But I do think that AI is going to help us deal with the lack of reproducibility in medicine in general, because for the most part, medicine is, well, as a chemist and as a physicist, as a scientist, I know that most of the science surrounding medicine isn't science at all. It's mostly just trumped up witch doctoring. Let's not kid ourselves. Like, there's very little reproducibility in this stuff. And I think that AI as a thing, as a technology, is going to be able to help us get past all of the lack of reproducibility in medicine and actually weed out all of the, frankly, bullshit that we're fed by the pharma companies, by the politicians and everybody else. I think that's going to be the net benefit in the long run. In the short run, oh, God knows what's going to happen. And so I want to, like, this, let's just, so let's keep our eyes peeled on this. And I don't trust Sam Altman as far as I can throw him. I don't trust Bill Gates as far as I can throw him either. I think I'll be honest with you. I think once we get past the initial shock and awe of what Trump is doing right now, guys like Gates are going to be in real trouble. And I think that's like, I think that's blatantly obvious. Getting us out of the WHO, which Gates throws billions of dollars at, like, and all those people throw so much money at, that's a big deal. I think we have to kind of look at it like that's real. And then, like, people visit Trump all the time. Like, it doesn't mean that they didn't have to go and bend the knee. So we'll find out.
I'm just going to ask some pointed questions. We'll go Tom first and then Matthew.
Could I just one little response on what he was talking about? First of all, Larry Ellison created the Oracle database as a CIA project. And then he left the CIA project and created the company Oracle. And he's always been very tight with the CIA, very much involved with Oracle. So that's just a point I wanted to make.
All of old Silicon Valley, Intel, Microsoft, all of them, they were all chosen. Like, let's not kid ourselves. All of these old institutions, all the media outlets, all of it, the movie studios, Silicon Valley, why Silicon Valley is in Silicon Valley is because it was under the auspice of the San Francisco Fed. Like, I'm not, like, this is all old stuff going back 70, 80 years. Now, the big question is, what is it going to look like going forward? Okay. The CIA, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm no fan of it, certainly, but I sit here and I wonder, who was actually running the CIA for all these years? Was it sovereigntists, American sovereigntists? I don't think so. If they were anything, they were British sovereigntists. This is my worldview. Like, the CIA is a nest, and the State Department is a nest of old intelligence networks going back to World War II, which is all dominated. And all of our intelligence services and the fiefdoms and the siphoning off and the silos of all of our information, British.
This
is incredibly important, because at the same time as you're talking about this stuff, Trump's literally going after the Bank of England.
That was going to be my next two questions, actually.
And that's where we're going. And so it's like, we'll see. I mean, honestly, I think we're looking at when Trump means America first, it may make some of us very uncomfortable. There's going to be a lot of good things that come out of this, and there's going to be some things that make us very uncomfortable about what comes out of it. Remember, I still subscribe to the Strauss and Howe argument that, the fourth turning guys, that he's a gray champion. He ain't a white champion, and he ain't no black champion. He's going to do good, he's going to do bad, and we're going to have to watch what comes out of how these institutions are reformed. Okay, but as long as most of the information gets out into the light of day with the right people around him to give him good information, Kennedy at HHS, Gabbard at DNI, that should temper a lot of these other outside influences. That's what I'm hoping for.
Just one more comment about the WH pullout. Don't forget that in his first term, when he defunded the WHO, unfortunately, the researchers on my committee did the real digging, and what actually happened was he took the amount of money that he was giving the WHO and he gave it to Gavi as extra money. And then Gavi then made up that shortfall in the WHO, not unlike EcoHealth Alliance being a proxy for Anthony Fauci and the NIAID. Second, and the way to pull out of the WHO is the head of state has to write a letter to the WHO saying, we are hereby pulling out of your organization. What he has done is had the Secretary of State write a letter saying we intend to pull out of the WHO. So there's some things here that are little misdirections, and I mean, I really do hope that he does pull out of the whole WHO agenda and do everything he can to stop that organization and the UN. I mean, they're the ones. And by the way, Sam Altman was critiquing and paying money to actually harm the Trump's chances of being reelected. To see him standing in a room with that guy is just stunning. It's almost like there's something about the superpower of these big pharma companies that that is basically keeping Trump from turning around and saying, look, I made a mistake on this warp speed thing by bad advisors, and I apologize for being misled myself and then doing this thing. Until he does that, and he's pursuing, this agenda still with this Stargate thing, it's very, very dangerous, because that's the worst part of what the globalist institutions are doing, is they're depopulating with bioweapons. Yeah. So that's anyway.
No, I agree. It's a depopulation agenda. I'm not gonna argue with you about that at all, Matthew. No, there's no argument there. This is sincere, and Trump will never apologize for any of his mistakes. This is the one aspect of this. This is the one aspect of his this is the one aspect where I consider Trump a narcissist. The older I get, the less I see him as that kind of narcissist. He's not a malignant one, so certainly. Yeah. The people who accuse him of being a malignant narcissist are all malignant narcissists. Okay, so I just see I see Trump as, someone who he's in anger mode. He's focused on the rot that is in front of him and getting rid of the mechanisms by which they derailed his first agenda, during his first administration. You got to get rid of all those people. You've got to take this thing out layer by layer by layer. I think having, at the end of the day, RFK is out of committee on a 14-13 vote that came out down this morning. Elizabeth Warren is screaming bloody murder because that's who she is. It's going to go to a vote. He's going to get confirmed. We're going to get all three of them. We're going to get Kash Patel. We're going to get RFK, and we're going to get Tulsi Gabbard. Okay. Yeah. They're all grandstanding because on Capitol Hill, knowing the Senate the way I know, watching these people the way I know them, they're all in the process of rolling over. So let's watch the process. Let's watch the process going forward to see what happens. And
yes, then absolutely.
Let's just watch the process going forward, and let's not poison the well yet. Let's keep our eyes open.
Absolutely. Okay. And
then when we have to, we will hold his feet to the fire on the things he does wrong, and we will praise him for the things he does right. That's not going to change, and we'll just go from there. So
now, Payman, I know you have some questions, so I'm just going to put this on the back burner. But I'd like to talk about the benefits to Canada of what's happening right now because of Trump and his threats of tariffs. How this is doing a great thing for Canada. But anyway, go ahead with your other questions. You can do those first.
So the questions I have, we'll go Tom, Matthew. What are when is he going to go after the CIA, State Department, and the City of London, and what is that going to look like?
He's already going after the CIA, put Ratcliffe in charge, and Ratcliffe's going to go after. Ratcliffe all but said yesterday that Adam Schiff is a traitor and needs to be hung. He didn't say it in so many words. What he said was, we found out that the head of the committee was also the head of siloing the information, and that's not the way that's supposed to work. So in lawyer speak, he all but said Adam Schiff is a traitor, and Adam Schiff 3 times over is a traitor, and he's going to go to jail. And he's going to be prosecuted. He's going to go to jail. He's not going to be allowed to sit. That's what I think has happened. Like, let's start there. And the reason that they pushed him into Dianne Feinstein's seat is so that he has immunity while he's in the Senate. But let's watch this play out with him, because he may have to resign, or a recall vote in California, yada, yada, yada. Let's watch this happen, because what Trump is doing right now is using the LA fires as a means by which to end the illegal immigration and everything else by cleaning up the voter rolls in California, and by cleaning up everything else about California, which has basically all but outlawed Republicans from running for office for all intents and purposes. You clean up the voter rolls in California, and you clean up the mechanism by which these people actually, subjugate the rest of California. I'm talking about blue California, those, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Once that all falls apart, once all of their heroes all turn out to either be, traitors for the Chinese, or traitors for Ukraine, or traitors for the British, or whomever. Once that becomes obvious to everybody and their brother, they're all going to have to resign at it. Well, they don't have any shame, so don't expect them to resign. But when you've got them with the goods that they're actual traitors, the immunity starts to go away, and then you can actually have some form of durable overhaul of California's politics. Moreover, Trump is changing the way we handle money internally in the United States. And California as a thing, as we've always known it, is a product of the current makeup of the Federal Reserve and the way the money is dispersed in Washington. And I wrote a long article for this month's newsletter going over this basic idea. And again, this goes back to the points earlier about why is Silicon Valley in Silicon Valley? Why is all the technology in Silicon Valley? Why is the Department of Defense and everything else? And part of it is because the Department of Defense was, of course, doing Pacific theater operations and all the rest of it. But when you think of it in those terms, California is being drained. He's going after the census. He's going to strip California of 3 or 4 electoral votes or more, because they probably should have been stripped of at least 3, because these people counted illegal aliens on the census. Okay? Like everything, California as a thing has crested and now it's on its way down in terms of political power. That political power that's been concentrated in California is going to be democratized. It's already being democratized. Trump started the process with getting rid of the SALT deductions back in 2017. But this is a thing that's going to take a long time to work itself. This is the process that's going to take a long time to work itself out. But you poison the well now for an entire generation, and we move on, because California is the center of the globalist power in the United States. Personally, California is the capital of the United States, not Washington, D.C. All of those lobbyists that can, quote unquote, control Congress, they all point back to California. All the bad regulations come out of California. It's the EU model all over again. California was a test base. Create globalism, a test bed for globalism, create durable political advantage in one area of the country, use that to then influence everything else about the country's regulatory scheme and its direction as a society. It's the same thing they did in Germany in order to consolidate power within the EU. Okay? And it's all about money flow, folks. That's why I don't really worry about. To me, the Project Stargate thing is it's not minor because the implications are huge, but you have to fix the money flow in order to be able to fix anything, because you have to stop the strategic, durable capital advantage that one region of the country has over everyone else, which is unfair and unwarranted. It's clearly they just tilted the game board in such a way to send all the money to California, originally to New York and Illinois, and that's all ending. And so that's why from my perspective as someone thoroughly looking at things from a monetary policy standpoint and from a money flow standpoint, and that politics is downstream of the money flow. That to me is far more important than anything else. We can stop Project Stargate tomorrow. Stroke of the pen, law of the land. Get rid of it. But getting rid of the outside influence over the way the dollar flows around the world, such that somebody else controls the price of dollars as opposed to us, that's a fundamentally different world. And that's what I work on all day long, right? It's been my shtick now for 3 years, or 4 years.
And that just reminds me that ultimately at the highest level, what we're facing globally right now is getting back to the U.S. Government in this is the Catherine Austin Fitts and Dr. David E. Martin restatement because she was an insider. She was a central banker and she was also the secretary of the HUD. That in 1997, they discovered that the Social Security obligations to the retiring baby boomers would run out to zero in about 2026 because of the demographics. So they needed to do either the United States was going to default or they had to reduce those costs. And the only way to reduce those costs was to have less 65 and over people. And that's in fact, look at this what happened with COVID. It hit people that were, Yeah. So
Now,
the money
clearly,
flows. The money flows, the control of the central banks, and that they're in turn involved in funding the U.S. I mean, this debt-based monetary system are really the power brokers, for sure. But anyway, I agree. The financial thing is really important for everyone to understand that. And there's lots of great summaries by Catherine Austin Fitts and Dr. David Martin just last week on Alex Jones. Fantastic summary there. Anyway,
well, what I'd say is that in order to deal with, the argument I've been making for a long time now is that the United States declared independence in 1776. They fought a war to win their independence, and then from the day after Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, the British were scheming to figure out how they could take their colonies back. It's been that way ever since. And because they held such a huge trade advantage over the United States after the end of the war, we were never in control. We've never been in control of our monetary policy. We've never been in control of the value of the dollar. Okay, never. Up until the end of LIBOR, and LIBOR only ended because we adopted SOFR during Trump's first term, the beginnings of SOFR during Trump's first term, and we took over the pricing, the debt indexing rate of the U.S. dollar, which then sets the price for dollars globally based on domestic demand for dollars, not international demand for dollars. Okay, that's the fundamental point everybody has missed, and so to this point, they still don't quite wrap their heads around it because they look at domestic liabilities and that domestic this and domestic that. It's not about domestic; it's about the foreign flows of dollars.
Tom, can I jump in? Tom,
yeah, sure.
Sorry, I'm gonna illustrate my own naivety, but what is LIBOR? What is SOFR? And what exactly is the issue with the banks and the City of London? If you could explain it in layman's terms.
Sure. I'm sorry. I never know where what venue I'm in when I'm doing something like this. Okay. So LIBOR was the London interbank offer rate, and it was adopted in 1984 as the way to price dollars for debt contracts around the world, and including the United States. So every debt, I don't care if it's a car loan, a credit revolver, a Turkish cymbal factory that wanted to do a plant expansion and they bought dollars. Every offshore or onshore dollar loan was indexed to LIBOR. So whatever the LIBOR rate was quoted as at the end of the day by the London Interbank Offer Group, those 18 LIBOR banks will get together, they get on a phone, they go, I'm seeing 4.257%. I'm seeing 4.258%. They agree to themselves that that's going to be the printed cost of dollars at the end of the day, so that the next morning the banks can open up and then offer you loan rates, right? And when we had an international dollar market and no one knew what to do, right? How to price these dollars, because there were loan demands in London, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, wherever, right? It was a natural outgrowth. The problem was that was centered in the City of London. The City of London has a lot of things about it that are different than the rest of the world, including the ability to infinitely rehypothecate securities, pledging them as collateral against everybody else's loans. So you can easily and very quickly lever up a $1 million worth of Eurodollars held in someone's foreign bank account up into however many dollars you want, especially if we're constantly pushing interest rates lower and lower and lower. The closer you get to the zero bound, the more leverage you can take on, right? So it's just math, folks, right? Because the servicing of that debt drops, and so you can now lever up 10, 12. This is why we went from, a leverage rate, a balance sheet leverage rate of 5 to 1 was historically, I was pretty good. 8 was, oh my God, you're over leveraged. 10 was insane. We were getting into 20s, 30s, 40s during the zero bound years after the great financial crisis of 2008. LIBOR was still the law of the land. So in America, what we have was, if the offshore banks and the people who've made loans, right, in Eurodollars offshore, if they're more vulnerable to a rate shock, to a change in the fundamental cost of dollars, and that's what I mean by that is if the Fed decides to raise interest rates, short-term interest rates, so raise the borrowing rate in order to slow down the American economy like they're supposed to do, then what's going to happen is that you will wind up draining the offshore dollar markets faster. LIBOR would then blow out to the upside because the international demand for dollars to service all the debt that's out there would go through the roof, and all of a sudden people will be willing to pay any price to get dollars because they've got loan due on Friday. They got payroll to make. They got this. They've got that, right? So what would that do? Well, LIBOR would blow out to the upside. Well, guess what? Any new loan origination in the United States, your mortgage, your credit revolver, your car loan, your credit card rate, whatever, would also summarily blow out based on LIBOR, because so much of the world was based on LIBOR plus or minus a certain percentage, generally plus, right? LIBOR was the base and then higher. So it would always meant that the Fed was always short-circuiting their own rate hike cycle, because the Eurodollar market would collapse, right? You get an inversion in the Eurodollar futures curve. This Jeff Snyder used to talk about this all the time, and he was right when LIBOR was the law of the land. Here's the thing. So we would get an artificial slowdown in the United States because the rest of the world was slowing down, which would then and then we'd get we'd get a credit slowdown here because rates were rising the rates were rising faster than the actual demand for money in the United States. It was causing the Fed to having lost control of its own monetary policy. So now that was, and by the way, people like Bernanke and Yellen didn't care. They loved this. They were globalists. They worked for offshore. They didn't care. They're traders. Now, Trump comes into power in 2017. He's handed by Wall Street a name. This is where I mean by Trump isn't a details guy. This is why I'm not that worried about Sam Altman showing up one day. Sam Altman might wind up in Guantanamo 6 months from now. Who the hell knows? My point is that he didn't know who Jerome Powell was, but he was handed by his trusted advisors on Wall Street, and certainly Goldman at that point, saying, look, this guy Powell is great. He's a hawk. And he is. So let's make him Federal Reserve Chair. Let's set him in charge of interest rates. The first thing, so Powell gets confirmed. The first thing he does is moves John Williams from the Atlanta Fed to the New York Fed, the all-powerful New York Fed. John Williams is the architect of SOFR, which has been sitting as a white paper in the Fed for 15 years. SOFR is a secured overnight financing rate. It's a secured rate as opposed to an agreed-upon uncollateralized rate like LIBOR is. This is a secured rate that's it's designed around to quote us the cost for money in the American monetary system based on actual repo transactions, actual demand for money in the repo and money markets on a daily basis. And so SOFR then gets quoted, and then so SOFR is the key, because what SOFR does is it says the domestic demand for money is X, not what LIBOR says. Okay, LIBOR is now subordinate to SOFR, but SOFR's put on a 5-year rollout starting in 2017 to become the new debt indexing rate for all American debt as of January 1st, 2022. Now, in 2021, Powell starts stealth tightening. Everybody screams. The evil in Congress start trying to undermine Powell, build back better, all the post-COVID stuff in order to keep Powell at the zero bound after COVID. They try to get rid of him with the insider trading scandal. It fails. They try to not get him. They try to put the kibosh on him so that they can put their own person in as head of the FOMC, Lael Brainerd, who was going to then effectively kill SOFR, push us onto modern monetary theory, and then inflate to the high heavens. That was their plan. It failed because Powell got reconfirmed for a second term. The reason that Powell eventually got confirmed is not because Joe Biden loved him, but because the FOMC eventually voted Powell after his first term officially ended, made him chair pro tem until confirmation. So it tied Biden's hands. He had to put him up for a confirmation vote. Powell, this is in February of 2022, SOFR is now the debt indexing rate for the United States. LIBOR is now dead for American markets. Now your credit cards are tied to SOFR, not to LIBOR. Powell gets reconfirmed in February of 2022 with an 80-20 vote. He starts raising rates in March, and then goes on a tear and raises interest rates to 5.5%. And it forces everything we're seeing today. Everything is all tied to that. Because the capital flow since then, it's forced the ECB into yield curve control. It's forced everybody to have to deal with the fact that we found out that the United States economy can handle 5.5% interest rates. The rest of the world can't. Why? Because of everything everybody's been screaming about, that the United States economy is more efficient than everybody else's, and that's why we have to have protection tariffs, and we have to have this, and we have to have that, and we can. Excuse me, it's our monetary policy. This is literally the first time in 250 years we are in control of our own monetary policy. And Powell has done exactly what he's needed to do to protect American banks. He's done other things as well. It took me an hour to go through it all. And I've gone over this in 100 podcasts. This was the key, because everything we saw under Biden and under the potential Harris administration was designed to try and force, especially Janet Yellen at Treasury, force Powell to cut rates early. And they couldn't make him do it. Why? Because the American economy was actually in better shape than everybody thought it was. Why? Because they kept looking at the past and going, well, with these parameters and this commercial real estate and this, that, and all these indicators that we've all had, they were all based on a world in which we were indexed to LIBOR. But no longer was anybody using LIBOR in the United States. And therefore, the City of London could not jack LIBOR up and hurt us. All they would be doing is hurting themselves. So LIBOR sat there at a positive 30 basis point spread as an uncollateralized rate versus the SOFR as a collateralized rate until LIBOR finally ended, which was on September 30th, 2024.
Let me jump in. My brain is bleeding. We're going to go to Matthew.
Sorry. I'm trying to do the whirlwind tour here to try and get you to understand this is a very, very esoteric point, but it's key to understanding everything. And if you can understand the basics of how that's the fundamental difference, now the United States has the ability to set the terms of what dollars are going to cost. Moreover, that means, especially with the other things the Fed has done, is that anybody who wants to get dollars from overseas needs a bailout. They got to go through the Fed. They can't go to the commercial banks. They can't go to the domestic repo markets. You want to know why? Because Wall Street will not, and has not since 2019. And you want to know a real reason why COVID happened? Because JP Morgan stopped taking European sovereign debt at par for repo contracts back in January of 2019. Draining. I remember Zero Hedge writing article after article saying, why is JP Morgan trying to create a credit crisis? Like, no, they're not. They're trying to set up a world where the Americans, because look, when a bank, when you're a banker, let's back up for a second. You're a banker. You're in Europe. You're in Germany. You're Deutsche Bank. You're, Credit Suisse. You're Santander. Pick one, and you need dollars badly. You can go to the Fed to get them, but it's expensive from the Fed, or you can maybe make a private repo sale with an American bank, right? Well, if the American bank turns to you and goes, well, Fed's quoting 4%, how about 3%? And you're like, yeah, I'll give you 3%, but I'm only taking your sovereign debt at 70 cents on the dollar. So I'm only going to. So if you want $100 billion in repos, that's great. I'll give you 70 billion, and I'll give it to you at 3%. You need 100. Like, that market's dead. There is no. They got to go to the Fed at 4%. Like, right. This is and this is the situation. When that happened, that was. I'll be honest with you. It was clear to me that in about March of 2020, I wasn't quite on board with this worldview. I just said in 2019, this feels like 2007. like when the repo market seized up in 2007, and by March of 2008, Bear Stearns had seized up and vaporized, right? I said, well, about 6 months from now, after the Fed has come in and try and stabilize everything, there's going to be a 6-month halo effect, and then we're going to have another financial crisis in March. Yeah, that financial crisis happened to be COVID. Lines right up with COVID. When the Treasury market goes bidless in March of 2008, and then Trump is forced to sign off on the CARES Act and trillions in spending that no one should have done and all of this stuff. As far as I'm concerned, COVID was an operation to get the Fed back to the zero bound, as well as kill off a whole bunch of boomers, as well as introduce the mRNA vaccines, as well as and they were expecting to get rid of Trump in 2020 and then get rid of Powell in 2022 and run the table.
Can I,
go ahead, Matthew.
I was just going to say that, I mean, on this very point, COVID is very instrumental in the central banking in the City of London's goal, which is to cause the U.S. to assume so much debt that the currency starts to fall, and then we can switch over to the new CBDC system as a problem reaction solution.
That was the plan. The plan was to then force the United States into a situation where, remember, the Build Back Better bill was sold to us during the negotiations. The guys, you remember back this far. I did. I covered all of this in like grave detail on a daily basis on my blog and in podcasts. I said, look, you watch this carefully. If this thing doesn't get through the Senate, it's because somebody is sitting on a couple of key Democratic senators. In this case, it was Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who refused to sign off on it because Pelosi was out there, and everybody in the God's green earth. Oh no, it's not going to cost us anything. It's not going to cost us anything. It's not going to cost us anything. It's all paid for. Nonsense. Eventually, Manchin comes out and says, "I'm going to wait for the CBO report." Of this bill. And when the CBO report came out and said it's going to cost the United States $6.5 trillion in the first 3 years of this bill, Manchin's like, I'm a no now. I'm done. And I'm telling you, Manchin and Sinema were sat on by Wall Street to vote that down and destroy Pelosi's speakership.
I have a question, Tom. First of all, I'm just absolutely blown away by your knowledge of the money system and in the U.S. dollar and the LIBOR and such. I'm just really impressed. And there's a question I have. I observed started studying this more and more since 2020 that in 2018 they've been running infinite sort of quantitative easing with zero interest rates. And then the Fed decide, after the last financial crisis, and then they decide, we got to do something. We got to start bringing this interest rate up. And then when they hit to about 2.5%, I believe it was in October 2018, the overnight repo market blew up. And they said, whoa, I don't trust this bank on the other side is going to be around 24 hours. I want it 12%, that's way too high. That
was September 2019. That was the repo
crisis. September 2019. Okay.
SOFR blew out. There was the SOFR crisis in September 2019, but that was predictable because what happened was because J.P. Morgan was the first of the American banks to refuse to do, like I said earlier, to take European sovereign debt as repo as at par for repo collateral. That's what started to blow the thing out. And SOFR at that point was a very, very thin market. Okay, because it was in a pilot stage at that point. So, it was just being tested with certain types of debt instruments in the U.S. It was still in this rollout period. So they had to do something then to get the Fed to come in and have to shore up the repo markets.
Yeah,
and they did. And the Fed came in and did what they needed to do. Now, after that, that's what I was saying. Like that happened, and they
also dropped the interest rate back down to zero. Or 2.5 or something.
They didn't go back to zero until COVID. March of 2020 was when Powell had to go back to the zero bound because no one talks about it, but because the U.S. Treasury market went bidless, meaning there was no market
for
U.S. Treasuries. And when that happens, you can always know when the Fed is going to come in and do something drastic.
Yes.
It's when they don't care about the stock market. They don't care about
it's the debt market. It's the debt market.
It's all about the U.S. Treasury market. That's the only thing they care about.
Yeah.
If the U.S. Treasury market goes bidless, they can't do monetary. They can't do monetary operations. They can't do anything. And so that's really important.
I have a burning question on this. Is it the case? I mean, my understanding is basically that the liquidity in the banks is so bad that the repo market is essentially about making sure they can borrow millions of dollars from each other, the banks, or hundreds of millions.
That's what the repo market is for.
Yeah. So that when the Fed checks their bank balances, they can see they have enough money, that they're liquid, right? So what's going to happen? And as I understand it, it's a regular injection into the repo market nightly, of printed money by the Fed to keep the banks liquid. What's going to happen if the central bankers?
We have to explain something.
Okay.
This term "printed money" comes with a lot of baggage. The Fed was instituted. I'm not a fan of the Federal Reserve. I'm not a fan of any of this stuff. I'm a hard money guy. But understand the world we live in. The Fed creates and destroys elastic money on a daily basis. Okay? On a daily basis. Okay? The Fed's been doing quantitative tightening for 3 years now. What's quantitative tightening? It means allowing the treasuries and the mortgage-backed securities they have on their balance sheet to roll off and not be reinvested, meaning they're shrinking the size of their balance sheet. Yeah. That means they're shrinking the actual monetary base. It means they're shrinking the leverage within the debt markets. Okay? Understand that the stock of money, for all intents and purposes, does not matter. What matters is the flow, the marginal flow, and the cost of that flow was what everybody's managing. Okay, and the cost of that flow is the cost of doing business in the repo markets.
Yeah, yes,
that's it. And as long as all of those interest rates, the overnight swap rate, the overnight swap rate, the SOFR, all of that, as long as those are within the Fed's window, which they have been, of a quarter point. They have a range. As long as they're there, there is no stress in the domestic repo markets. Mm-hmm. That's it. And everything else does not matter. Who is injecting new money into the money supply is the Treasury running a $2.5 trillion deficit. Because that's real base money going into the world. Now, if that money doesn't circulate because it goes into goes onto the reserves of the central banks, the foreign central banks, which is what's been happening. They've been sterilizing that. And the main culprit there is the Eurozone. The Eurozone has been the one, and the Bank of England have been buying an unbelievable amount of U.S. Treasuries since Powell started tightening. Why? Because they're trying to cap the price, the rate on the long end of the U.S. yield curve. Why? Because they can't afford to have the long end of their yield curves blow out. Why? Because it's all about the spreads, folks. It's all about the spread between German debt and American debt, UK debt and German debt, French debt and German debt, US debt and Japanese debt. It's all about the spreads because everybody's trying to hedge their FX risk, their money risk.
Yes.
The Japanese are trying to hedge their dollar risk versus the yen. The Europeans are trying to hedge their euro risk versus, the Thai baht, whatever. And that's why they write all these quadrillions of derivative contracts that everybody talks about. But most of them, yes, in fact, do net out to zero as long as everything stays, the interest rates stay in a very tight range because that's how these contracts are written. Mm-hmm. I have hedged my risk with this currency as long as the exchange rate stays within this range, or as long as the yield spread changes within this range, and that's what everybody's worried about. The minute Powell started to raise interest rates hard, the first thing Christine Lagarde at the ECB did was create the Transmission Protection Instrument, otherwise known as the TPI. I happen to call it the toilet paper initiative because that's exactly what it's turning the euro into. because she's having to maintain. Everybody thought it was to maintain German versus Italian spreads because the yields on Italian BTPs were screaming higher. But no, it was about holding U.S. German spreads under control. And then the downstream effect of that is that it holds German Italian, German French, French Italian spreads under control. And Lagarde's been doing this for 3 years. And and in order to do this, she's had to trash the euro in the process. That's why the euro has crashed from $1.25 to $1.03, and it's headed to 80 cents, if not 60 cents.
Doesn't that strike you as intentional?
Dramatic pause.
Sorry, had to take a drag there. Otherwise, I'd have to relight the cigar. It is somewhat intentional. Because their goal in Europe, they know they can't pay any of this back. What they want is the digital euro. What they want to do, and they've talked about this, and George Soros has given the script away on this 100 times, they want to default on their existing stock of debt, issue a new currency and a new pile of new debt at an advantageous rate. But the only way they can do that and get the investors to come back in, same way the British have done this before. The British have gone broke multiple times, they've confiscated the money, wrote down the debt and said, we're going to pay you the consols, where they're literally, the Bank of England was paying out to, on these consols for 300 years, right? Every time the British Empire has gone bankrupt, they collapse the existing stock of debt. They write it all down, but they not going to pay the money back in the back end, but they're going to pay a permanent, 6% or whatever to the bondholders. But they're never going to get their initial capital back. They're going to get paid in perpetuity, perpetual bonds. Okay?
Yeah.
That was their plan, and they were going to pay back in this new crappy digital euro. And they also expected to do this first and then be the first ones to build back afterwards, because they were going to leave the United States, Russia, and China involved in a major world war that didn't involve them. That was their plan. That's what Ukraine is all about. That's what Taiwan is all about. That's what Israel and Gaza is all about. Okay? No, and clearly the American banking system said, yeah, that's nice. We're not doing that. No. And all they had to do was put a sovereigntist in charge of the Fed, raise interest rates to 5.5% with a domestic debt indexing rate, and then have Putin not escalate the war in Ukraine beyond a certain limit. And Putin has handled this perfectly. Because if Putin had escalated at each turn, then the United States and NATO could have had the casus belli under Biden to go in and try and then officially really deal with the problem, get us involved with a war we couldn't get out of, and then by having these, and then by destroying the country with the invasion at the border, with the fentanyl crisis, with the this, with the that, all of this stuff. The goal was the destruction and looting of the United States, which was being done at a turbocharged rate under Biden, who was running massive deficits and money laundering and all the rest of it. This is all part of the plan, and they expected this to happen. And then they were going to, and then basically what they wanted to do was leave the world with no other choice in the West, but then to reinvest in their new version of the European Union, which would be to transfer all the political power to the UN and to make the IMF the central bank of the world. Jim Rickards warned us all about this stuff 15 years ago. I never quite understood what he was talking about. Now I get it. Okay. So there we are.
I got a question, sort of related to the Biden thing. So you can throw your thoughts on Biden into this question, but it's from the audience. Wolf says he's curious on your take on Carney. Is this the city of London in a Godzilla fight with the Fed?
Yes.
Or is it the Anglo-Americans are infighting? What's your thoughts?
Mark Carney is the high priest of financial globalism. He is absolutely, he first was the president of the Bank of England. Then he was in charge of the Bank of Canada. Now he wants to be prime minister of Canada. Like what they're trying to do right now is a meet the new boss, same as the old boss situation in Canada. and I have it on good authority as compromised as the Canadian banks are. The Canadian banks, by the way, were the ones that put the kibosh on Trudeau debanking all the truckers. Okay, I have that on very good authority. That it was Canadian banks. That was the Canadian banks issued a demand to the Canadian Senate, which has never done anything, and just like the House of Lords in England, right? Show up and say, "Nope, you can't do that." When's the last time you heard the Senate of Canada, the Canadian Senate, do anything other than rubber stamp whatever goes on in Parliament? It's the same thing with the House of Lords, right? So, Mark Carney is an attempt to continue to hold the line for as long as possible in the hope that they can figure out a way to foment the civil war in the United States. That's the goal.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And they're not going to get there. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And what Trump is doing with Canada right now is he's forcing everything out into the open about how the money flows such that Canadians can understand, no, really, you would have a better deal, Alberta, being the 51st state of the United States, than you have right now.
Yeah.
Saskatchewan, you would have a better deal. So what he's actually doing is he's actually forking Western Canada versus Ottawa.
I have a question. I just have to open the door for a second. Be right back.
What are your thoughts on Joe Biden, though? Just like a Manchurian candidate?
Joe Biden was put in place because Joe Biden is easily controlled. The real Manchurian candidate was Barack Obama. That's how deep this goes. The real traitor to the United States, the real Manchurian candidate. I wouldn't say controlled by China, but metaphorically speaking, the real Manchurian candidate was Obama. He was created out of whole cloth in order to do this. The Obama wing of the Democrats maps directly to the old continental powers of Europe. It gets more complicated than this when you really start breaking it down, because continental Europe and the city of London are not on the same page about everything. The only thing, there's two things they're on the same page about: destroy the Russians and destroy the Americans. They are not on the same page as to who gets to run the world afterwards. This is very important.
What side is Carney on?
So Carney's clearly with continental Europe. So is Tony Blair.
I see.
Okay.
What's
Nigel Farage, for example? I think he maps the city of London in the old British establishment. I think.
Sorry, Matthew, you had a question?
Yeah. Well, yeah. First of all, what's happening in the States with Trump in this whole threatening of the tariffs is actually doing some good in Canada, because he's really it's quite clear that the amount of money laundering and fentanyl production in Canada is potentially the lowest order numbers are 12% of our GDP. I mean, it's just astounding, and we're literally putting out as much fentanyl as Mexico, and certainly double the rate of people on the terrorist list coming across the border from Canada. And he's using that and forcing the Trudeau regime to essentially, invest right now into, securing the border. And this is a good thing, because what the Liberal Party was trying to do is to fight this tariff war dollar for dollar purposefully. They knew it would hurt our middle class, which is their whole goal. Half of the cabinet is penetrated by Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, not to mention the ties to the WHO and the ties to the UN, and their intent on implementing the servitudes of the middle class becoming basically the poor class. I mean, I'm in the middle of the geographical center of a C40 15-minute city designated city of Toronto. What they're trying to do here is just horrific. And it's a good thing that Trump is drawing the line and forcing Trudeau to back off. We're really worried about Carney taking control, because Carney, he is like infinitely smarter and more powerful and able to, he could just tell the Bank of Canada to do things. He have a lot of influence. And so this is very dangerous for Canada, and we're trying to get Canadians to wake up. And that we've got a court case, the JCCF has got a court case to try and stop this prorogue of government. And so they come back and there'll be a no confidence vote, and we get an election, and we will get somebody in at home. I mean, a lot of us who are informed want someone that's not a globalist, right? And that means you can't go the traditional uniparty, just like the uniparty in the States, right? So we're looking at more of a people's party, and that's what we're hoping for. But at least we can get some representation of the People's Party in there in this coming election, because we cannot have Carney in power they could literally stretch this out until November 2026 without an election. And
that will be their plan.
Yeah, absolutely will be their plan.
And they're doing the same thing in England with Keir Starmer.
Absolutely, yeah. And
same thing with Macron in France, and that's
right.
why Candace Owens is out there explaining to everybody that Macron's husband that Macron is married to his husband, and
that's right.
It's serious. It's serious, and this is why Trump came out the other day and said, "I'm not negotiating with the EU. They're not a country."
Yeah.
I mean, I'm only negotiating with the individual countries because they're countries. The EU is not a country. No, he's dead serious.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm glad.
And then Viktor Orban came out this morning over in Hungary and basically declared independence. Said, I'm ready to negotiate unilaterally with Donald Trump.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
No, it's very obvious. And yes, and from what I understand, Pierre Poilievre is not any great shakes either.
No.
But he's not. But
no, they brought in his mentor brought in UN Agenda 2030. I mean, and right. He's totally supportive of the whole globalist agenda. So that's a disaster for Canada.
But here's the problem. Well, it's not the problem. Here's the solution. The solution is that Trump just keeps holding your feet to the fire.
I hope so.
And he's not going to let up. He's not going to let up.
So.
Fentanyl is not the only issue here. The tariff on Canadian oil is meant to finally force Alberta and Saskatchewan and British Columbia, like, look, this is the way it's going to be. Like, you already send us, and you have to send us all this oil because you can't get it out any other way, because the globalists killed the export terminal at Kitimat 10 years ago or 12 years ago. And you put the kibosh on the big East-West pipeline, which I just found out about yesterday, literally.
Well, true. Yeah.
And so the oil has to come across the border, shipped on our pipelines over to the refineries in the East in order for you guys to even have an economy. Trump knows exactly what he's doing. And it has to be this. It has to be this kind of play in order to get this done. So you've got, you got 30 days.
Tom,
and in 30 days, I still think he's going to put the tariff on them.
Let me ask you a question. This is a very, very simple question. What is the globalists like? What's their aim? Because surely they know that Canada is so close to the U.S. and Trump is not going to back down. Are they hoping to destroy Canada?
They're hoping, I think, to outlast. Ultimately, they're hoping that they can figure out an end run around Trump. It's not going to work. They're fighting a series of rearguard actions here. If I was looking at this as a war, this is literally the German army retreat from Stalingrad. Is where we are.
Well, you got to remember Canada.
And by the way, it's been this way since Omicron.
Yeah, well, Canada is basically representing at this point the globalists and the continentalists in Europe, as you say. I mean, we are so infiltrated that to the extent that Trump can force these people to back off their grip on Canada. I mean, America doesn't need a socialist, globalist to essentially implementing corporatism or fascism next door, a UN WHO place, right? And to the extent that Trump can try and shake that up, that's a good thing. I just hope that we don't, like we're looking at here in Ontario, doubling if these tariffs come through. We have some manufacturing, a lot of it's been offshore, but literally, we're going to double from 600,000 employed to 1.2 million unemployed over, very quickly, and it's going to cause a lot of pain.
That's how you force a political revolution. I mean, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. So yeah, I have a phone call I got to take real quick, so I'm going to put myself on mute and deal with this, and then you guys keep talking.
Okay,
sure. Matthew, I am freezing over here. I think the heat died out in my.
Oh no! I'm sorry to hear that.
I don't know. We can go to some of the questions to kill some time while he's on the phone.
Sure. I mean, I won't be able to answer the financial questions that he can. But I mean, I have a question, and that is that, we know that we were expecting that when Trump took power, the globalists would do anything they could to stop him. I mean, they tried to assassinate him 3 times. So I'm surprised. I was expecting in the first week that the city of London would pull the plug on the overnight repo market in the States, which is still getting injected money every night. And they can just tell the Fed to stop injecting that money. Liquidity dries up, the banks stop, lock up, and then we are forced into the new world order of a CBDC and a very calamitous environment. And I'm just wondering how what Tom thinks about that. So maybe it's now the case that with the changes in the American bankers trying to maybe don't want that path. I hope so, because Canada is headed there. We look at the spending that the Trudeau government has done, just like the Biden regime. $240 billion on COVID, paying healthy people to stay at home. Just crazy stuff like that. Yeah, Tom. So I was just asking, do you think that what we were seeing as a lead up to this whole thing in 2020, that we were expecting that if Trump got elected again, the globalists would be so upset that they would literally pull the plug on the U.S. economy just by having, for example, the Fed decide to not inject any money in the overnight repo market, the liquidity dries up the banks, and then bang, the whole market goes down. And then we're into this. Do you think that's still a possibility?
No, the only problem with that is that Powell's already told you everything that needs to be done. He raised rates when he needed to get rid of Biden. And then right before the election, he cut by 50 basis points. That 50 basis point cut was very important, because what it said is two things. It said, one, the U.S. credit markets are in worse shape than everybody thinks they are. So I have to cut by 50 basis points, which is why you saw the long end of the yield curve sell off. And that started the process of then starting to drain capital out of Europe and a variety of other things. That was one. And then two, he was telling Trump, yeah, you're going to get elected now. And I'm going to start bringing interest rates. I'm going to start bringing short-term rates down, because the banks in the United States needed the liquidity.
Yeah.
So you see, when he raised interest rates to 5.5%, let's just make this very simple. The banks have to hold U.S. Treasuries on their balance sheet in order to offset your deposits, right? That's what they do. Now they bought all these at 0 and 1% and everything else. So when the yield goes up, the price goes down. So let's say you're a local bank and you've got, $20 billion on your balance sheet, and, or $10 billion on your balance sheet. And you're like, okay, I just took a 30% haircut on the value. I can't sell those securities. If there's a run on the bank, I'm going to sell them for 70 cents on the dollar. I'm in trouble, which is why he created the Bank Term Funding Program during the March banking crisis, which, by the way, I'm firmly convinced the Fed did on purpose in order to take a lot of money laundering capacity out of San Francisco. By the way, that's a different story for a different day. That he did that so that cutting interest rates by 50, then 25, and then 25 very quickly helped to improve the holes in those balance sheets. So literally, the banks took a punch in the mouth, metaphorically, in order to get rid of Biden. A big punch in the mouth. And they had to be paid back somewhat. Now, he didn't cut in January because he can't, with Trump threatening him. Look, it was so very obvious. To me, I was one of the very few people who said, look, Trump and Powell have already had this conversation. They know exactly what they're doing. 90% of this fight between Trump and Powell is kayfabe. Straight out of WWE, Worldwide Wrestling. Purely. Because Trump wouldn't be where he is today if he didn't have the backing of the major banks on Wall Street. And you could watch Jamie Dimon and John Solomon and certain CEOs on Wall Street were telling you that it was okay, one, to vote for Trump, and two, he's got the right plan, and we're going to do this. Dimon was clearly like acting as Secretary of State against Anthony Blinken during the last 2 years of the Biden administration. He just couldn't do it officially. So what had to happen then was, so Powell did what he needed to do, which was to bring short-term rates down a little bit, but then not cut in January because, well, inflation is still high, and he has to. And after Trump threatened the Fed, the Fed has to come back and go, oh, we're not cutting rates because the president told us to create the illusion that they're still independent, that there's some. It's all a game. Powell's going to cut again in March. He's going to cut 3 more times. He's going to cut in March, probably July, and probably November.
Will this have any impact on the value of the currency, cutting the rate so much?
No, because they're going to cut $1.3 trillion out of the budget. Like the budget,
Mhm.
cutting all this money out, that's deflationary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting bringing capital in is going to be inflationary because he's going to bring in capital. Like in the short term, you got to get, he's going to cut spending, which is going to be deflationary. The Fed has to hold rates and then has to cut rates. It's going to be this game of, of you improve the way we handle the money, and you start stimulating loan growth because, well, grown-ups are actually in charge. We have a president again, right? Like Senator John Kennedy the other day said, like, we have a president again for the first time in 4 years, right? Like, so that's going to attract capital. Us getting our budget in place is going to, in our fiscal house in order, it's going to attract capital into the U.S. Okay, that's going to be both inflationary and at the same time deflationary because the government's going to be spending less money. So now Powell gets to hold rates relatively high to gets the best of both worlds. He gets to hold rates relatively high to only allow good projects with high rates of return. That's what high interest rates are for. When if you've got a great business idea and you think you can make 10% on that a year on that money, you'll borrow at 6, you'll borrow at 7, right? So you only want to put high return projects on the board at this point in process. You got to keep short-term rates and the cost of money relatively high in order to not get, more pets.com, for lack of a better term, or more, you know what I mean? And that's the difference. No, we're going to get oil pipelines. We're going to get new roads. We're going to get the bridges rebuilt. We're going to get this done. We're going to get that done. We're going to, and that's where the money needs to flow. If the rates are too low, then the money flows wherever the hell it wants to go. You keep interest rates relatively high. It only puts the best quality projects relative to the interest rate on the board.
The bar is higher. Yeah.
So let me ask you guys, how are we doing?
This is classic Austrian business cycle argumentation about the crowding out of money. I'm doing like Mises 101 here. Like,
So David's got a question on
are we doing for time?
I got about 15 minutes.
Okay. So I got an audience question. Tom, he kind of already answered the CIA. Trump is already starting with that. The question is, Ukraine, is Trump being set up for failure if Putin holds all the cards?
No. Trump wants out of Ukraine. He also wants to ensure that we're going to find out that $100 billion that Zelensky said the other day didn't show up to him. We're going to find out that was a Democratic Party money laundering operation.
Exactly.
And guess what? Again, that's yet another one of these. And I'll be honest with you. We could have a moment here. I don't buy this argument, by the way. I think that Zelensky is a puppet for the globalists. But let's just, for the sake of argument, play the game that even Zelensky was in the dark about this. That maybe he is just, a puppet or just a dupe, right? Imagine, if you will, Zelensky and Putin both coming to the conclusion at the same time that they've been played and that this war was completely unnecessary and that this was all done in order to kill a bunch of Slavs and create a petri dish for more aid money to go in and rebuild the country. And remember, the WEF said that Ukraine is going to be our shining example of the new technocracy, right? BlackRock and BlackRock's going to get paid, guys. I hate to say this,
and they've lost their farmland.
But they're not going to get everything. Larry Fink is going to get everything he wants, and if he's not careful and he overplays his hand, Jamie Dimon will take his entire business from him. Don't ever think that, because BlackRock is not a $10 trillion company. BlackRock is a $100 billion company that controls $10 trillion worth of our assets. Dimon could take out BlackRock tomorrow. Okay? Never, ever think that is not the case. So, I am going to have to go soon because I've got my business partners.
Jamie Dimon.
My phone is blowing up on the side. He needs to talk to me. But just understand that Putin and Trump have already mostly worked out the terms of the agreement. Why is the and your big tell is that the U.S. is calling for elections in Ukraine. because Putin will not negotiate with Zelensky. Why? Because Zelensky's not the president. Zelensky is only president because he declared martial law and suspended the elections.
That's right.
So Putin wants a duly elected representative of the Ukrainian people to negotiate with, not Zelensky. And Trump is giving him that.
I have a question.
Already been worked out.
So this is my only question that's for me. Go ahead, Matt.
Just a quick observation. Jamie Dimon has also been named by Whitney Webb as part of the triad of people like Mark Carney, Jamie Dimon, and
I'm shutting that down right now. This gets me fucking angry.
All right.
Whitney Webb does not know what she's talking about on this point. She ran with the whole Epstein. She ran with the whole Jamie Dimon Epstein thing when it came out. That was a nuts and sluts campaign against Epstein because Epstein was going against the globalists. Dimon was going against the globalists. I've argued this 100 times. Don't listen to her on this.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, it really bothers me that Whitney is still trying to make her bones on this. It bothers me to no end because she knows damn well what I've been saying. She knows that I'm right about this, and she refuses to do anything. And she refuses to even. I'm done with it. That is wrong. Dimon is clearly the guy putting Trump in freaking power, for Christ's sake.
Matthew, I think that's a hard no.
But here's the thing. The doctrinaire libertarians, who I used to be one, because I know these people, the doctrinaire libertarians are all angry and pissed off because it wasn't one of their guys doing what they always said they would do.
Tom, just a quick question from my end.
I'm serious on this. This will get me. I've already been ostracized. Hell, the Mises Institute wouldn't release the speech that the keynote speech that I gave to them, telling them, "Hey, it's time to grow up and let's get a little nuance into our conversation." No, they don't even get me started. I'm dead serious. This is nonsense. And I have been counter-programming people on this for months and for over a year now. And it's very clear that I'm slowly beginning to win this argument.
Tom,
he's also being amplified on this point because it works for her and it works for them. Whitney blew up after she went after Dimon.
Tom, I just have a question on revenge.
And nobody gets blown up unless they want them to be blown up, unless they're saying what people want them to hear. The reason I'm still doing this thing mostly in the shadows is what I do is because no one will allow me to blow up because they don't want that. They don't want this out there in the general public. I'm dead serious. I know this. I know this thing 18 ways from Sunday. I've been dealing with this my entire life. I can see when somebody is being blown up for a reason, and you never want to be on the wrong. You never want to blow up for the wrong reasons. Why did Mike Benz blow up? Mike Benz blew up because he was released by the Trump organization. Remember, he was a speechwriter for the Trump in the first term, and he was sent out as a nobody. And then he was allowed to. Then Elon, amplified him a little bit, and then he went on Tucker Carlson, and then he blew up. Why? Because he was prepping the narrative for why we're going to get rid of USAID, why we're going to get rid of the National Endowment for Democracy, teaching everybody how to do the forensic accounting, how to do the forensic accountancy on where the money's been flowing. He's literally been out there as advanced recon for what we're seeing right now. He's for real. Whitney's for real. She's just lost in her own solipsism. Okay,
Tom,
last question.
Quick question. Revenge from Trump. What are you going to see? Are we going to start seeing international criminal arrest warrants or extrajudicial killings of these people in the city of London?
Oh, I don't know. What I will say is this. If somehow this preemptive pardon of Anthony Fauci stands up, don't be surprised if the Russians ask for Anthony Fauci to stand trial in Russia for crimes against humanity, and he dies in a Russian prison.
I think they've already asked. Actually,
I know they've asked because they've been at the UN for 3 years explaining where all the biolabs and all this stuff.
Yes.
All that stuff has been presented at the UN, and the Biden administration put the kibosh on all of them.
Yeah.
The Russians are big mad, and they have every right to be.
Yeah. Well, I just hope that Jamie Dimon doesn't support the vaccine stuff, that Stargate program. If he will say he's not for the using of mRNA to take down the world population, then let him be as influential as he wants. That'd be great.
I don't know what he's. Look, it's not Diamond's bailiwick. He's not going to say that stuff like that because he runs J.P. Morgan Chase, and he has to continue operating as that. You have to always read Diamond in the role that he's in. He's in an unofficial role with the Trump administration. He's never going to step outside of his. He's never going to give you an opinion that is not in the best interest of the company that he represents. Period. He's one of the best CEOs this world has ever seen. That means that he was a good globalist when the globalists were in ascendance, and he also is a very good sovereigntist when he helped shift the game board back towards the sovereigntists. And I firmly believe, when there was no hope, J.P. Morgan was as globalist as a bank could be, because what else are you going to do? It's in my company's fiduciary best interest. But when these people decided that they were going to take out the commercial banking system of the United States,
big mistake. Yeah.
Big mistake. Big mistake. City of London, way too big for its own britches. They're getting rolled. I'm dead serious. Okay, guys, thank you so much for this. I'm really sorry I was late, but I got to run.
No, it's okay. So, thank you very much for coming on, Tom, and enjoy the Florida weather.
Bye. Be well.
Thank you so much, Tom. Wow.
That was a good online econ lesson.
Besides from taking a swipe at Whitney, the rest of everything that he was talking about was very educational. He's clearly a money guy who knows his stuff. He's got the chops in the business to understand it's an infinitely complex thing. It's like if you want to become a molecular biologist, the amount of schooling that you have to go through, or to be an actuarial, for example, for an insurance company, the amount of math, actuarial studies you have to do to learn this money stuff. You have to be, become a stockbroker. Then you have to, go into the senior management in these investment firms, and then become a hedge fund trader. And then, to get to the point where you can really understand everything. And this guy, I don't know, he's more an academic, I think. Is he a professor or?
Honestly, somebody told me to reach out to him on social media. I thought he was like some guy in Canada sleeping on the couch. I was not prepared for that, and I'm surprised he agreed to come on.
If he's actually to the point of choosing whether or not Jamie Dimon, why he's defending the hell of Jamie Dimon, he's obviously connected very intimately to the U.S. financial system. The one thing that he concluded with is a little bit of cause for hope. That really was the City of London that was running this operation, where as part of this globalist World Economic Forum takeover, that they're going to essentially, by rolling out a CBDC just with the central bank, it would disintermediate the commercial banks. Same thing here in Canada. The retail banks they're no longer directly connected, with the money to the people. It's now the central bank has all the money, and they have an account directly with the central bank for each person. And that was going to basically crush the banking system. And what he's saying is that was a big mistake. The City of London people don't realize that the American banking system is really, they're the ones who put the U.S. Fed together as much as the Rothschilds and the other central bankers that could participate as well. And these central bank, these American banking people are very powerful. And to the extent that they're pushing back against the destruction of the U.S. banks is good. Because that means that the CBDC thing can't really be rolled out, because it would really, hurt the central banks, because now they're no longer part of the picture, or a very diminished part of the picture. So that's potentially good news that he's sharing there. The esoterics that he got into left me,
It took me a while to figure out what he was talking about, but so many of the things that my other guests have told me started to fall into place, like the Eurodollar. The impact that has on the U.S. economy, the fact that so many of the transactions go through the banks in the City of London, and Trump wants to sort of bring that back to the U.S. And it goes back to the question I asked him at the end, where I said, "Are we going to see arrest warrants or extrajudicial killings?" The City of London will never stop coming at him until, unless something happens to scare them.
Yeah, well, yeah, that this is the times we live in. We've now identified the most powerful people in the world, and they are probably the U.S. bankers and the City of London, and of course, well, depending on if there's three places in the world where there's a part of like a city or something that is not really jurisdictionally part of the country it's part of, right? One of them is Washington, D.C., which is the head of the military might of the world with 800, Army, the U.S. military bases around the world and Air Force bases and Space Force bases. Then there's the Vatican City, where the Pope is, and the whole Vatican and the Vatican Bank, which is a huge bank, and they have reach tentacles all around the world. And in fact, they have a big connection to Israel, and they claim to own a lot of land there. So that's a lot of they want it back and stuff, and it's because there's a huge conflict going on there. But then the third place is the City of London, the Pentagon, like the Washington D.C., and what's the third place?
The City of London. So it was D.C., Vatican, City of London. Is that?
Yeah, D.C., Vatican, City of London. Yes, and so we end up, for me, this was a real education since 2020 and COVID rolled out, is to really understand the big power centers in the world. And I'm glad they're fighting, frankly, because that will, hopefully consume them rather than trying to depopulate us all.
I want to get to these comments. This is funny. Sure. Wolf says the City of London is the Bond villain organization of Bond villain organizations. Then he says the Vatican is the planet's largest real estate holder. He's not sure, but he says it sounds plausible. I've heard that too, but that's mostly from Godfather 3. That's my source.
Yeah. Well, that they pictured, these mob guys in Italy going in and meeting with the cardinals, and even higher. I'm not sure. And the Vatican Bank has been, involved in, unfortunately, a lot of money laundering as well. And well, look, getting back to Canada. What about the TD Bank and the $2.4 billion, whatever, US, 3 billion Canadian fine. And that was underscored in the last 48 hours about how much money laundering is going on in Canada. The criminal organizations, they said 4,000 criminal organizations, the RCMP said. And we know that there's a certain one that's connected to China that has made a huge contribution to the Trudeau Foundation. And we also have the same whistleblower. Blender News found that whistleblower that was saying that there's at least 11. Was the CSIS that came out with the 11, but this whistleblower who they relied on for the information. He said there's 50. There's at least 50 people in Parliament that are basically owned, paid off. So the level of corruption we have in Canada at this point, it's like they're saying, it's about 12% of our GDP is in organized money laundering and fentanyl trafficking. And to the extent that Trump is holding Canada up and saying, no, you got to get your act together or you're going to really suffer. And I'm really glad he's doing that, because we as Canadians will benefit if we can get rid of this in our country, because it's a stifle on our economy. It's a stifle on our culture, and it's causing, fentanyl deaths like you wouldn't believe. But also, of course, the Trudeau government's experimentation with free drugs and legalizing that stuff is just insane. And it's good that Trump is, drawing a line on that. Now, I'm a Canadian. I don't want to become part of the, 51st state. But if that's the kind of threat that has to happen to wake up the Liberal Party and the Power Corporation of Montreal, that, hey, you better step out of this business you're in, because the American country is becoming very powerful and putting their foot down. And we have interprovincial trading tariffs and all kinds of things going on, such that only 33% of our GDP is from interprovincial trade. 66% is with other countries. It's easier to trade with Belgium, essentially, than it is to the province next door. It's just ridiculous. We need our own Doge thing to go through and clean up our governments and get rid of all the tariffs between the provinces, and fix this democracy up, because it's not working for the people. That's my perspective.
I was asking him, I think it was Tom. Tom. I was asking him about what the globalist goal is with Mark Carney, because the globalists, they're rich, but they're not stupid. I mean, surely they know that Trump is not going to just sit back and let Carney, have free reign north of his border. And every single thing that they've tried to do in the last 72 hours, Trump is just swatted away, swatting the fly.
Attention, please, man. Your attention, please.
Sorry.
This is the fire alarm inspector speaking.
I'll just cover the microphone.
What can I do here?
It's not too loud, but
Emergencies, you will be
Uh, so Carney has got to be stopped. We've got to not let Carney take power because he will push through a bill C-63, which will take away our voice. You and I, as participating in podcasts and criticizing things, will be on the list. And I mean, they can literally take any tweet that you've done going back 10 years or any Facebook post, and some person with green hair and earrings in their nose is going to say, I found one. This one makes me feel unsafe. And then they report that to the government, and it's all kind of anonymous. And then the Human Rights Tribunal, which has like a 98% conviction rate, charges you a $20,000 fee that goes to the guy with the green hair and the nose rings. And it's a whole full-time job for these guys. They're going to make a fortune. And then $70,000, $50,000 of the 70 goes to the government. And once you lose your freedom of expression and your freedom of speech, all the other rights, Rocco Galati explained this, all your other freedoms are dependent on the freedom of expression. We lose that, and C-63 goes through, that's the end. And then C-293 is going to push through, right? Those are the two ones obviously key to his legislative agenda, because I understand that Erskine Smith, who created C-293, has been elevated to the cabinet now. And he is now Minister of Housing or something. You don't reward some backbencher who's technically putting through independent bills unless the bill that he's put through is something that you really like. And I think they're going to pick that thing up and start pushing that through as soon as the prorogue period is over. I think it's potentially even worse. I think what's going to happen is the prorogue period is over. They're going to do some legislative tricks to keep this government from sitting. Now that they've obviously got a complete co-opted governor general that would actually, I mean, if you thought to yourself, what's the worst scenario that a governor general could do in terms of allowing a prorogue? Well, how about when a guy he's so involved in corruption and so many ethics charges and done so many bad things that his own government party wants to get rid of him and all the Canadian people won't respect him, then you're going to give this guy a prorogue to avoid getting kicked out of Parliament? No, she's taken. So they could potentially extend this thing with Mark Carney in power without even Parliament going, and he could just shove through things. It's very scary. I think we might have to. I think
Trudeau doesn't want us talking about this.
No, this is the all-powerful property management companies and their fire management thing.
All right. Well, I hope there's no actual fire. And
never.
We don't want you dying of smoke inhalation.
This is just to make sure everyone's sitting on edge and traumatized enough. This is a regular thing for Torontonians and condos in 50-minute cities. So anyway, thank you so much, Payman, for this. I know it was a last-minute thing, but I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, actually.
No, so did I. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for being patient. Tom was he had a lot to talk about. But,
And just a reminder to people, this Ostrich story is actually huge. It's much, much bigger than you heard about. This is really going to question the whole idea of these vaccines anymore. And please to check out Stop C293COMT, that's COMTEE on Twitter. So it's @ Stop C293COMT. We have a space on Wednesday, the 5th of February, tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to have Connie Shields interviewing people, including hopefully someone from, actually, I think we do have one person from the Ostrich farm, the daughter. And we have Dr. Rima Lebo, and we were inviting a lawyer and an immunologist and also a microbiologist. And we're going to expose this whole thing. And I think Canadians will be really interested. So just a little plug for that. So thanks very much.
All right, I'm going to go buy an alpaca sweater. I'm freezing over here.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. All right.
No worries.
Okay, take care. Nice talking to you. Okay.
Bye
Bye-bye.
everyone.